You wrote that? Victoria's laugh cut through the champagne-tinged air of the Seattle Public Library's reading room like glass shattering on marble. She gestured at the modest display of my debut novel with one perfectly manicured hand, the other clutching her phone where her Instagram story was already mocking the event to her 73,000 followers. I mean, Emma, sweetheart, I love that you're finally pursuing your little hobby, but did you really think people would pay money for this? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The small crowd that had gathered for my book launch fell silent. My father shifted uncomfortably near the biography section. My brother Derek smirked into his craft beer. And I stood there in my simple black dress from Target, holding a copy of the book I'd supposedly self-published after years of obscurity, watching my sister perform for an audience that had no idea they were extras in the wrong story. What Victoria didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the book she was dismissing had already sold 200,000 copies in pre-orders alone. What they didn't know was that I'd written it under one of 7 pseudonyms that had collectively earned over $50 million in the past decade. What they didn't know was that the modest bookstore I ran in Fremont, the one they pitted me for clinging to after Mom died, was the public face of a literary empire that spanned 3 continents. My name is Emma Thompson, and I learned a long time ago that the most powerful stories are the ones people don't see coming. The morning of my book launch had started like any other Wednesday. I woke at 5 in my supposed studio apartment, which was actually the top-floor penthouse of the Meridian Tower in Belltown, and reviewed overnight reports from my London and Sydney offices. Thompson Literary Group had 3 books hitting various international bestseller lists that week. None of them bore my real name. None of them connected to the quiet woman who ran a small bookstore and lived, as far as my family knew, on the edge of financial collapse. I dressed carefully for the launch event. Nothing that would raise questions. The Target dress, comfortable flats from Payless, minimal jewelry. My sister would be there, I knew, with her phone and her followers and her endless need to position herself above me. She'd been doing it since we were children, and motherhood had only sharpened her competitive edge. Every family gathering became content for her lifestyle blog. Every interaction was raw material for her personal brand of relatable luxury. The bookstore, Pages and Stories, sat tucked between a coffee roaster and a vintage record shop in Fremont. To the casual observer, it looked exactly like what it was supposed to be, a struggling independent bookstore barely holding on in the age of Amazon. The reality was that I owned the entire block, purchased quietly through one of my holding companies 5 years ago. The coffee roaster paid me rent. So did the record shop. So did the yoga studio next door and the Thai restaurant on the corner. But my family had never asked about any of that. They saw what they wanted to see, Emma, the dreamer, clinging to Mom's memory by keeping her beloved bookstore open. Emma, the failure, who'd chosen books over a real career. Emma, the disappointment, who'd turned down a scholarship to study business so she could write stories nobody wanted to read. I arrived at the Seattle Public Library 2 hours before the event to oversee setup. The venue coordinator, a bright young woman named Alicia, greeted me with genuine warmth. She had no idea that I'd donated $500,000 to the library's literacy program last year through an anonymous foundation. She just knew me as the local bookstore owner launching her first book. "Your publisher sent over the display materials," Alicia said, gesturing to a table where 50 copies of my novel stood arranged in careful stacks. "They said to expect a good turnout. The pre-order numbers have been really strong." I smiled, knowing that strong was a considerable understatement. My actual publisher, the one whose name appeared on the book, was a subsidiary of Thompson Literary Group. The editor listed in the acknowledgments worked for me. The marketing team that had orchestrated the strategic release worked in offices 3 floors below my penthouse, in a building my family had walked past 100 times without recognizing my connection to it. The book itself was different from my usual work. My pseudonymous novels spanned genres: literary fiction that won awards, commercial thrillers that topped charts, romance that made readers weep. This book, published under my real name, was something more personal. A story about mothers and daughters, about the stories we inherit and the ones we choose to tell. I'd written it in the back office of the bookstore, in the same space where Mom used to sit and read submissions from local writers, offering encouragement when the publishing industry offered only rejection. She'd been the first person to tell me I could write. Not should write, or might write someday, but could write, present tense, as if the ability was already there waiting to be used. While my father pushed Derek toward finance and Victoria toward anything visible and prestigious, Mom had sat with me in the bookstore's mystery section and said that some people were meant to tell stories that changed how others saw the world. She died 3 years ago, never knowing the full extent of what I'd built. I'd wanted to tell her so many times, but the secret had become its own kind of story, and I'd been curious to see how long I could maintain it. How long my family would continue to see only what they expected to see. My father arrived first, checking his watch as if he had somewhere more important to be. He probably did. His real estate development company was hemorrhaging money, though he'd never admit it. 3 of his signature projects had stalled in the permitting phase. 2 more had lost their primary investors. He was leveraged so far beyond his assets that bankruptcy wasn't a question of if but when. "Emma," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Good turnout. Your mother would have been proud." The lie settled between us like dust. Mom would have been proud, but not for the reasons he imagined. She would have been proud that I'd stayed true to my voice while building something extraordinary. She would have been proud that I'd learned to be invisible when necessary and undeniable when it mattered. Derek showed up next, bringing with him the particular energy of someone pretending everything was fine. His investment banking firm was under investigation by the SEC for securities fraud. I knew because I had excellent lawyers who kept me informed about anything that might touch the family name. He'd been living beyond his means for years, using his position to fund a lifestyle he couldn't actually afford. The BMW in the parking lot was leased. The watch on his wrist was a convincing fake. Even his wedding ring was gold-plated rather than solid gold, though his wife didn't know it yet. He clapped me on the shoulder like we were buddies, like he hadn't spent the last decade making jokes about my career choices at every family dinner. "So this is really happening, huh? You're really doing the author thing?" "I'm really doing it," I confirmed, watching him scan the room for important people to network with. He wouldn't find any. The important people in publishing knew me by other names, in other contexts, in rooms he'd never be invited to enter. Then Victoria arrived, and the energy shifted immediately. She swept in wearing designer clothes she could no longer afford, trailed by her photographer husband who documented everything for the brand. Her children, mercifully, had been left with a sitter. She'd been losing sponsorships for months, her engagement numbers declining as audiences tired of her particular brand of humble bragging. But she still performed success with the dedication of someone who'd forgotten it was supposed to be a performance. She air-kissed my cheeks, her phone already angled for a selfie that would be captioned something like "supporting my baby sister's dreams" with a string of book and heart emojis. Then she saw the book itself, picked up a copy, and her expression shifted to something between pity and amusement. The cover was understated, elegant. My mother's favorite color, a deep blue that reminded me of twilight. The title, simple and direct. My name, Emma Thompson, in clean serif font. Nothing flashy. Nothing that screamed for attention. It was exactly the kind of book Victoria would dismiss without reading, the kind of quiet literary fiction she considered boring compared to the celebrity memoirs and self-help manifestos she featured on her blog. She flipped it open, skimmed the first page, and I watched her mentally calculate whether supporting me would benefit or harm her brand. The conclusion played across her face like credits rolling. That's when she laughed. That's when she made her pronouncement about trash and hobbies and misplaced confidence. That's when she positioned herself, once again, as the successful sister generously indulging the failed one's delusions. The small crowd shifted uncomfortably. A few people I recognized from the neighborhood bookstore community looked offended on my behalf. Alicia, the venue coordinator, appeared stricken. And my publisher's representative, Sophie Chen, stepped forward with a smile that could have cut diamonds. "Actually," Sophie said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room, "I think Emma might surprise you with how well the book is doing." Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched with theatrical concern as she turned to Sophie. "Oh, I'm sure Emma's friends and family will buy copies to be supportive. That's sweet. But let's be realistic about what success means in publishing. I have several author friends who've shared how brutal this industry is. Sophie's smile never wavered. She was one of my most trusted executives, handpicked 3 years ago from a major New York house. She knew exactly who I was, and she was enjoying this moment with the same quiet pleasure I felt watching my sister perform confidence she no longer had any right to. The room had filled considerably in the past 20 minutes. I recognized faces from the literary community, book bloggers I'd carefully cultivated relationships with over the years, and several people I didn't know at all. The bookstore's events calendar had listed my launch, and apparently word had spread through the Seattle reading community that something interesting might happen here today. My father cleared his throat, trying to smooth over the tension. Victoria, maybe we should let Emma have her moment. This is a big day for her. The condescension in his voice was almost worse than Victoria's mockery. A big day, as if I were a child at a science fair rather than an adult launching a book that had already changed my life in ways they couldn't begin to comprehend. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He had no idea that the Mercer Island house he was so proud of, the waterfront property he'd mortgaged and remortgaged to fund failed developments, was currently 3 months behind on payments. He had no idea that the banks were circling, that foreclosure notices would arrive within weeks. Derek raised his beer in a half-hearted toast. To Emma and her book. May it sell dozens of copies. The smattering of laughter that followed felt like fingernails on a chalkboard. I maintained my expression of mild gratitude, the face I'd perfected over years of family gatherings where my choices were dissected and found wanting. The key to invisibility, I'd learned, was giving people exactly what they expected to see. They wanted struggling Emma, earnest Emma, naive Emma who didn't understand how the real world worked. So that's what I gave them. Sophie checked her phone, and I caught the briefest flash of amusement in her eyes. She was receiving real-time updates from our marketing team, watching the numbers climb as the West Coast woke up and discovered the book that had been strategically positioned across every major platform. The promotional campaign had been brilliant, if I said so myself. Months of careful placement, influencer outreach, advance reader copies sent to exactly the right people. All of it orchestrated from my offices downtown while my family assumed I was shelving books and struggling to pay rent. Before we begin the reading, Sophie announced to the growing crowd, I wanted to share some exciting news about Emma's book. As of this morning, we've seen truly exceptional response to the launch. Victoria's attention snapped back to Sophie, her influencer instincts detecting a moment that might be worth capturing. She angled her phone slightly, ready to pivot her narrative if needed. That was her gift, I supposed. The ability to rewrite her own story in real time, to position herself on the winning side of any situation. We've received advance orders from every major chain, Sophie continued, her voice warm and professional. The independent bookstore community has rallied behind this title in ways we rarely see. And the early reviews have been extraordinary. That's wonderful, my father said, in the tone of someone praising a child's mediocre report card. I'm sure Emma's worked very hard. Hard work was his answer to everything, as if effort alone determined success. He'd worked hard his entire life, throwing money and energy at projects that collapsed under the weight of his ego and poor planning. He'd taught Derek that connections mattered more than ethics, that the appearance of success was indistinguishable from actual success. He'd encouraged Victoria to build a life on the foundation of other people's attention. And he'd dismissed my choices as frivolous because they didn't fit his narrow definition of ambition. I thought about the conversation we'd had 5 years ago, when I'd asked him for a loan to expand the bookstore. $20,000 to renovate the back office, to create more space for community events. He'd laughed, actually laughed, and suggested I get a real job instead of playing shopkeeper. He'd offered to call in a favor, get me an entry-level position at one of his contractors' offices. Something with benefits and a future. I'd thanked him politely and found other funding. What he didn't know was that I'd used my own money, funneled through enough corporate layers to hide its origin. What he didn't know was that the renovation had included reinforced flooring to support the weight of rare book storage, climate control systems for manuscript preservation, and a security system that rivaled most bank vaults. The back office of Pages and Stories now housed first editions worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, manuscripts from authors who'd become household names, and the handwritten notes from my mother's years of nurturing Seattle's writing community. Sophie was still talking, building towards something. The crowd had grown quiet, genuinely interested now. Even Victoria had lowered her phone slightly, uncertain whether to document or dismiss what was happening. In fact, Sophie said, glancing at me with barely concealed delight, I received a call about an hour ago from our sales team in New York. They wanted me to share some preliminary numbers with Emma, and I thought, what better place than here, surrounded by the community that shaped her as a writer. My heart rate remained steady. I'd known this moment was coming, had choreographed it carefully with Sophie over secure phone calls and encrypted emails. But I still felt the flutter of anticipation, the same feeling I got when a story was building toward its climax and all the carefully planted details were about to converge. Victoria's phone was back up, recording now. She'd sensed that something significant was happening, and her content creator brain was working overtime to figure out how to position herself in the narrative. Would she be the supportive sister celebrating Emma's success? The skeptical realist providing necessary perspective? She was still calculating when Sophie delivered the first number. As of 9 this morning Pacific Time, Emma's book has sold just over 215,000 copies. The silence that followed felt like the moment between lightning and thunder. I watched the number land, watched my family's faces cycle through confusion, disbelief, and the beginning of comprehension. 215,000 copies. For a debut novel. For a self-published nobody running a failing bookstore. That can't be right, Victoria said, her voice lacking its usual certainty. That's not possible for a first-time author. Those are numbers for established writers, for celebrities, for people with platforms. Sophie smiled gently, as if Victoria were a student who'd almost grasped a difficult concept. It is unusual, certainly. But Emma's book has resonated with readers in remarkable ways. The online response has been overwhelming. We've seen organic social media buzz, book club adoptions, and what the marketing team calls lightning in a bottle. Derek was running calculations, I could see it in his eyes. 200,000 copies at retail price, minus bookstore cuts, minus publisher percentage. He was trying to figure out what my earnings would be, trying to reconcile those numbers with the struggling sister narrative he'd constructed. The math wasn't working, and his confusion showed. My father's expression was harder to read. Pride warred with something else, something that looked uncomfortably like resentment. His youngest daughter, the one who'd rejected his advice and pursued impractical dreams, had apparently stumbled into success. Except it wasn't stumbling, was it? You didn't accidentally sell 200,000 books. That required planning, skill, and resources he'd assumed I didn't possess. A woman in the front row raised her hand tentatively. I recognized her from the bookstore, a regular customer who came in every Tuesday for our mystery book club. Does this mean Emma's book is a bestseller? Sophie's smile widened. As of this afternoon, when the New York Times updates their list, Emma's book will debut at number 3 on the fiction bestseller list. Number 1 on the Pacific Northwest regional list. And it's trending toward the top spot on several international lists as well. The room erupted in applause. Genuine, enthusiastic applause from people who understood what those numbers meant, who knew how rare this kind of breakthrough success was. They were clapping for the quiet bookstore owner who'd apparently written something extraordinary. They were celebrating a local success story. My family stood frozen in their small cluster near the biography section, faces registering different versions of shock. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. Emma was supposed to have her little moment, sell a few hundred copies to friends and neighbors, then return to her modest life while they continued performing their various versions of success. Victoria's phone had slipped slightly, no longer capturing the perfect angle. Her Instagram story about supporting her delusional sister's hobby was suddenly outdated, embarrassing even. She'd have to delete it, reframe it, spin it into something else entirely. I could almost hear her mental recalculation. How could she take credit for my success without looking foolish for having mocked it minutes earlier? Sophie, bless her, wasn't finished. She had one more detail to share, one more perfectly aimed arrow. I should also mention that we've had significant interest from film studios. 3 major production companies have reached out about adaptation rights. Emma and I will be taking meetings next month to discuss options. Film rights. The words hung in the air like a benediction. My father's mouth opened slightly. Derek's beer hung forgotten in his hand. And Victoria's carefully constructed composure finally cracked, revealing something raw underneath. The reading portion of the event passed in a blur of voices and applause. I read the opening chapter, the one about a daughter sorting through her mother's belongings and discovering letters that revealed an entire life she'd never known about. The metaphor wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. The audience listened with rapt attention, and when I finished, the questions came fast and genuine. A young woman in vintage glasses asked about my writing process. An older gentleman wanted to know how long the book had taken to write. A book blogger I recognized from Twitter asked about themes of inheritance and silence. I answered honestly, carefully, giving them the truth without revealing the full picture. Yes, it took 3 years to write. Yes, my mother inspired the story. Yes, I believe that families often saw only what they wanted to see. Victoria had retreated to a corner with her phone, frantically typing. I could imagine the damage control happening in real time. Deleting the mocking story, crafting a new narrative about always believing in her sister's talent, positioning herself as the supportive sibling who'd known all along. Her followers would never know about the trash comment, about the dismissive laughter. They'd only see the carefully curated version where Victoria had been in my corner from the start. Derek approached me after the formal reading ended, his expression carefully neutral. That's really impressive, Em. I had no idea you had this kind of talent. Congratulations. The nickname felt wrong in his mouth, too familiar for the distance that actually existed between us. He was performing brotherly pride for the audience, for the literary community members who were watching our family dynamics with interest. But his eyes told a different story. He was calculating, wondering what this meant for him, whether my sudden success could be leveraged somehow. Thanks, I said simply. I've been working toward this for a long time. You should have told us, he continued, lowering his voice. We could have helped. I know people in media, could have gotten you some publicity. The offer was absurd on multiple levels. Derek's media connections were limited to business journalism, and most of those relationships were currently strained by the SEC investigation he thought was still secret. But more than that, the assumption that I'd needed his help, that I couldn't have achieved this without family connections, revealed everything about how he'd always seen me. I appreciate that, I said, maintaining the pleasant expression I'd perfected over years of these interactions. But I wanted to do this on my own merit. His jaw tightened slightly. Of course. I just meant, family supports family. The irony was breathtaking. Family supports family. This from the brother who'd borrowed $5,000 from me 8 years ago to cover a gambling debt and never paid it back. Who'd told our father I was financially irresponsible when I'd asked for that bookstore loan. Who'd suggested at Mom's funeral that maybe it was time I considered a more stable career path. Sophie materialized at my elbow with impeccable timing. Emma, there are some people from the Seattle Times who'd love a quick interview. Do you have a few minutes? Of course, I said, allowing her to guide me away from Derek's performance of sibling solidarity. The interview was brief and professional. The journalist, a woman named Patricia who covered local arts, asked smart questions about the Seattle literary scene, about independent bookstores as community anchors, about the role of place in fiction. I gave her good quotes, nothing too revealing, painting the picture of a local author who'd gotten lucky with her debut. When I returned to the main room, my father was waiting. He'd positioned himself near the display table, one hand resting on a stack of my books as if claiming ownership of my success through proximity. Emma, we need to talk. This is wonderful news, but you need to be careful. Success like this can disappear quickly. You'll want to invest wisely, make sure you're protected. Protected from what? I asked, genuinely curious where this was going. From people who'll try to take advantage. Publishers, agents, they're all sharks. You need someone you can trust handling the business side. I've been thinking, maybe I could help you set up an LLC, manage the royalties, make sure you're not getting cheated. There it was. The real reason for his sudden interest in my career. He needed money, and my unexpected success looked like a lifeline. In his mind, I was still naive Emma who needed protecting, who'd be grateful for his business expertise. He had no idea that I'd been running multiple LLCs for years, that I understood contract law better than most lawyers, that the publisher he was warning me about was a company I owned. That's thoughtful of you, I said carefully. But I actually have representation already. Legal and financial advisors who specialize in publishing. His expression soured. You hired people? Emma, that's exactly what I'm talking about. These so-called specialists will bleed you dry with fees. Family would do it for free, or at least for a fair rate. I let the moment hang between us, watching him realize that I wasn't going to immediately accept his offer. His face cycled through emotions, confusion that I wasn't grateful, irritation at being declined, and underneath it all, a growing awareness that something didn't quite add up about this situation. I'll keep that in mind, I said finally. Thanks for coming today. I know you're busy. The dismissal was gentle but clear. He nodded stiffly and retreated to where Derek stood nursing another beer. I watched them confer in low voices, my brother's animated gestures suggesting he was sharing his own concerns about my sudden success and what it might mean. The crowd had thinned somewhat, though a dedicated group remained, purchasing books and waiting for signatures. I settled at the table Sophie had set up and began the pleasant ritual of personalizing copies. Each reader had a story about why they'd bought the book, what drew them to it. A retired teacher said the premise reminded her of her own mother. A young writer asked if I had advice for aspiring authors. A book club organizer wanted to know if I'd be willing to join their discussion next month. I gave them my attention, my genuine gratitude. These were the readers who mattered, who'd taken a chance on an unknown author because something about the story called to them. They had no agenda beyond the simple transaction of exchanging money for a narrative that might move them. Victoria appeared at the edge of the signing table as the line dwindled. She'd composed herself, reconstructed her influencer persona into something that could accommodate this new reality. Her phone was mercifully lowered, though I had no doubt she'd taken dozens of photos to document her presence at her sister's successful book launch. Emma, I want to apologize for earlier, she said, her voice pitched to carry to anyone nearby who might be listening. I was surprised by the numbers, that's all. You know I've always believed in your writing. The lie was smooth, practiced. This was Victoria's survival skill, the ability to rewrite history in real time. In her mind, she probably already believed this revised version where she'd been supportive all along. I appreciate that, I said, signing another book for a woman who wanted it personalized for her daughter. Victoria hesitated, then pressed forward. I was thinking, I have a pretty substantial platform. 73,000 followers across Instagram and TikTok. I could do some promotional content for the book. Feature it in my lifestyle posts. It would be great exposure. And there it was. Not an apology, but a business proposition. She wanted to monetize my success, to create content around her best-selling sister. The promotional value she was offering would cost her nothing and potentially benefit her engagement numbers. She'd position it as generous support while actually using me to rebuild her declining influence. That's a kind offer, I said, meeting her eyes directly. But the marketing team has the promotional strategy well in hand. We're being very selective about platforms and partnerships. Her smile tightened. I'm not a platform, Emma. I'm your sister. Family promotes family. There was that phrase again. Family promotes family. Family supports family. All these sudden appeals to familial bonds from people who'd spent years treating those bonds as optional, relevant only when beneficial to them. Of course, I said mildly. And I appreciate you being here today. She lingered a moment longer, waiting for me to change my mind, to recognize the value of her offer. When I simply returned my attention to signing books, she drifted away, phone already rising to capture content that would tell whatever story she decided to tell. The event wound down as evening approached. Sophie helped me pack up the remaining books while the library staff began rearranging chairs. The launch had been a success by any measure. Good turnout, strong sales, positive energy. And the added drama of my family's reaction had provided entertainment for the local literary community, though they'd been too polite to acknowledge it directly. "You handled that beautifully," Sophie said as we loaded boxes into her car. "Your sister is something else." "She's consistent, I'll give her that," I replied. "Always looking for the angle." Sophie laughed. "The sales numbers are going to keep climbing. We're seeing acceleration in online orders. By tomorrow, we'll probably break 300,000. And the film interest is real. I have 2 more studios asking for the manuscript today." I nodded, absorbing information that should have felt shocking but instead felt inevitable. The book was good, I knew that. I'd written and rewritten it for 3 years, working with the best editors money could buy, testing different versions with focus groups, approaching it with the same strategic precision I brought to all my projects. Success wasn't guaranteed in publishing, but I'd stacked the odds considerably in my favor. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it to find a message from Derek. "We should grab coffee this week. Talk about what comes next for you. I have some ideas about managing this success." I deleted the message without responding. The requests would keep coming now, I knew. Suddenly I'd be relevant to my family in ways I'd never been before. They'd want meetings, advice sessions, opportunities to be involved in my newfound success. Each of them would approach it differently, but the underlying motivation would be the same: what could Emma's unexpected victory do for them? Sophie dropped me at my car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic that I maintained specifically for family events. My real vehicle, a Tesla I'd purchased last year, remained parked at my actual apartment building. The Civic started with its familiar rattle, and I drove through Seattle's evening traffic toward Fremont, toward the bookstore that everyone believed was my entire world. The bookstore was dark when I arrived, its windows reflecting the streetlights of Fremont's quiet evening. I let myself in through the back entrance, the one that opened onto the alley where delivery trucks had been unloading boxes of books for 30 years. My mother had stood in this same doorway thousands of times, accepting shipments and greeting sales representatives, building relationships with publishers back when independent bookstores were the lifeblood of the industry. Inside, I moved through the familiar space without turning on the main lights. The smell of old paper and coffee from the shop next door wrapped around me like a comfort. I ran my fingers along the spines of books I'd shelved myself, past the local authors section where my own book now sat, past the poetry alcove where Mom used to host reading groups. At the back of the store, behind a shelf marked staff only, I pressed my palm against what looked like an ordinary light panel. The biometric scanner verified my identity in seconds, and the wall section swung inward on silent hinges. Beyond it lay the first layer of what I'd built in the years since Mom's death. The space immediately past the false wall could have belonged to any serious book collector. Climate-controlled shelving held first editions and rare manuscripts, carefully organized and catalogued. This was where I kept the valuable pieces from Mom's collection, the books she'd acquired over decades of careful hunting. A signed Steinbeck. An early Toni Morrison. A complete set of first-edition Octavia Butler novels. Each one worth thousands, none of them visible to the casual bookstore browser. But even this was just another layer of misdirection. I descended the stairs hidden behind a panel that appeared to be structural support. Down one level, then another, into the spaces I'd excavated and renovated over 3 years of careful construction. The dry cleaner next door had no idea their basement connected to mine through a doorway concealed behind their water heater. The record shop owner had never questioned why I'd offered to pay for foundation repairs that required drilling through our shared wall. 2 levels below street level, the real work happened. The space opened into what I privately called the War Room, though my staff knew it as the Thompson Literary Group headquarters. 40 workstations arranged in clusters, each one equipped with dual monitors and ergonomic everything. Along one wall, Screens displayed real-time sales data from my various imprints and pseudonymous works. Along another, a digital map showed my international distribution networks, glowing dots marking bookstores and online retailers across 6 continents. I settled into my office, a glass-walled space that overlooked the main floor. Most of the staff had gone home for the evening, but a few dedicated souls remained, working on projects that couldn't wait. My COO, Marcus Reed, was reviewing contracts in the conference room. My head of digital marketing, Priya Sharma, was running analytics on our latest social media campaign. They both looked up when I entered, offered waves of congratulation that I returned with a tired smile. The event went well, Marcus said, appearing in my doorway with a tablet full of data. We're trending on Book Talk. For major influencers have posted reviews in the last 2 hours. All positive. The algorithm is favoring us hard right now. Film studios? I asked, though I already knew the answer from Sophie's update. 6 now. 2 more reached out this afternoon. All of them serious players with track records of successful adaptations. We can be selective. I nodded, already thinking about which studio would best understand the book's themes, which director might bring the right sensibility to the material. This was the part of the business I genuinely loved, the strategic decisions that could elevate a good story into something that reached millions of people. My personal phone buzzed again. This time it was my father, calling rather than texting. I let it go to voicemail, watched the notification appear, then deleted it without listening. He'd want to discuss my success, to offer advice I didn't need, to position himself as somehow integral to what I'd accomplished. The conversation could wait. Priya knocked on the glass wall, her expression a mix of excitement and concern. We have a situation. Your sister is posting about the book launch. Of course she was. I pulled up Victoria's Instagram on my desktop, watching her carefully curated story unfold. She'd edited the afternoon into a narrative where she'd been present for her sister's triumph, supportive and proud. The mocking comment, the trash reference, the dismissive laughter had all been erased, replaced with strategic cropping and selective quotes. One photo showed her holding my book with a caption about sisterly pride. Another captured her talking to Sophie, positioned to suggest they'd been having an in-depth conversation rather than the brief, awkward exchange that had actually occurred. A third showed the crowd at the event, implying through careful framing that all these people had come specifically because of Victoria's promotional support. She's claiming she helped generate buzz for the launch, Priya said, her tone carefully neutral. Several of her followers are asking how they can get signed copies through her. The audacity was almost impressive. Victoria had gone from mockery to appropriation in under 6 hours, rewriting history with the tools of social media curation. Her followers, who had no context beyond what she chose to show them, would believe this version. They'd see her as the generous sister boosting Emma's career, not the cruel one who tried to humiliate me at my own event. Let her post, I said finally. It doesn't affect our actual sales, and the algorithm might push it to people who wouldn't otherwise see the book. Priya looked uncertain. But she's essentially taking credit for your success. Don't you want to correct the record? I thought about the various ways I could expose Victoria's revisionist history. Screenshots of her deleted story existed somewhere in the digital ether. People at the event had heard her trash comment, had witnessed her dismissiveness. I could obliterate her false narrative with minimal effort. But what would that accomplish? Public humiliation of my sister? A family feud playing out on social media? That wasn't the story I wanted to tell. Not yet, anyway. The book will speak for itself, I said. Let Victoria tell whatever story she needs to tell. The truth has a way of emerging eventually. After Priya left, I spent an hour reviewing the next quarter's publishing schedule. 3 books under various pseudonyms were slated for release. A literary thriller under the name Catherine Wells. A historical fiction piece under Margaret Stone. A young adult fantasy under the gender-neutral J. T. Morrison. Each one had been written in this underground office, each one would be marketed through the sophisticated machinery I'd built over 15 years of careful expansion. The pseudonyms had started as protective coloring, a way to publish without the burden of family scrutiny. My first novel, written under the name Sarah Mitchell, had sold modestly but received critical acclaim. The second did better. By the third, I'd understood that I could build separate careers under different names, that readers would follow the work without needing to know the person behind it. Victoria and Derek had never read any of my books. I knew this with certainty because I'd tested it once, leaving a Catherine Wells thriller on the coffee table at a family Christmas gathering. Victoria had picked it up, read the back cover, and declared it looked boring before setting it down to check her phone. Derek hadn't even glanced at it. My father had used it as a coaster for his scotch. They'd never questioned how I supported myself on a bookstore's slim margins. They'd never wondered about the expensive renovations I'd made to the shop, the professional website, the sophisticated inventory system. They saw what they expected to see: struggling Emma, barely scraping by, too proud to admit defeat. The reality was that Thompson Literary Group had grossed $47 million last year. We published 83 books across our various imprints. We employed 214 people across offices in Seattle, New York, and London. We'd optioned 17 properties to film and television. And at the center of it all sat Emma Thompson, the invisible architect of an empire built on stories. My computer chimed with an incoming video call. I accepted it to find my UK managing director, James Whitmore, grinning from his London office. Congratulations on the launch. The numbers are extraordinary even by your standards. Thanks. I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself a moment of genuine satisfaction. It feels good to publish under my own name for once. Will you do it again? Or back to the pseudonyms? I hadn't decided yet. There was something liberating about being visible, about claiming my work publicly. But there was also comfort in the masks, in the ability to write without the weight of expectation and identity. We'll see how this plays out first, I said. The family dynamics are going to get complicated. James had met my family once, at my mother's funeral. He'd flown in from London to pay respects, and they'd assumed he was simply a friend from the bookstore community. They'd had no idea he was the managing director of a multi-million-dollar publishing operation, that he reported directly to me, that the condolences he offered came from someone who understood exactly what I'd lost when Mom died. How are they taking the success? He asked now. About as expected. Confusion, resentment, and sudden interest in being involved. Will you tell them the rest? That was the question, wasn't it? The book launch had revealed one layer of my success. But the full scope of Thompson Literary Group remained hidden. They thought I'd gotten lucky with a debut novel. They had no idea I'd been systematically building a publishing empire for 15 years, that the modest bookstore was just the tip of an iceberg that extended across continents and industries. Eventually, I said. But I want them to understand what this book represents first. Then maybe they'll be ready to see the rest. After James signed off, I pulled up the security feeds from my actual apartment, the penthouse in Belltown that my family had never visited. The space was dark and empty, waiting for my return. 3 bedrooms I barely used, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, furniture that cost more than Victoria's monthly mortgage payment. A life I'd built in careful secret, parallel to the one my family observed. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Derek. Then one from my father. Then, surprisingly, one from Victoria. All of them wanting to talk, to connect, to suddenly be part of my success story. I archived them all without reading the full messages. They could wait. They'd been content to ignore me for years. They could handle a few days of uncertainty now. Instead, I called the one person who'd always seen me clearly. The call connected after 2 rings, and my best friend Simone's face filled the screen. She was calling from her apartment in Brooklyn, where she worked as a literary agent representing authors who had no idea she was also my closest confidant and occasional conscience. I saw Victoria's Instagram, she said without preamble. That woman has absolutely no shame. None whatsoever, I agreed. But it doesn't matter. The book is selling regardless of her narrative. When are you going to tell them? About all of it? Soon. They need to understand the scope of what they've been missing. Simone had been there from the beginning, had watched me build Thompson Literary Group from a single pseudonymous novel into the machine it had become. She'd cheered every success and called me out when I let bitterness creep into my decision-making. She knew about the family dynamics, about the years of dismissal and mockery, about my mother's quiet support and my determination to prove something I'd never quite articulated. Just remember, she said gently, revenge is satisfying but forgiveness is freeing. Who says I want to be free? I asked, only half joking. Your mother would want you to be free. The words landed like they always did when Simone invoked Mom's memory. She was right, of course. Mom had never encouraged vindictiveness. She believed in second chances, in the possibility of growth and change. But she'd also believed in consequences, in people earning their redemption rather than having it handed to them. I'll keep that in mind, I promised. Right now, I'm just enjoying watching them scramble. 3 weeks after the book launch, I called a family meeting at my real apartment. The text I sent was simple and direct. Sunday brunch at my place. 11 o'clock. Address attached. Come alone. Victoria arrived first, her eyes widening as she stepped into the penthouse lobby. The doorman greeted me by name, and I watched her mental calculations stumble over this new information. She'd assumed I lived in a studio somewhere modest, probably Capitol Hill or maybe Greenwood. Not here, not in one of Seattle's most expensive buildings with views that cost more per month than most people's annual salary. Derek came next, his investment banker brain immediately assessing property values and mortgage implications. My father arrived last, his face carefully neutral as he took in the marble floors and the concierge desk and the private elevator that opened directly into my apartment. I'd set out coffee and pastries from the French bakery downstairs, the one that charged $18 for a croissant. They settled awkwardly in my living room, perched on furniture they were afraid to fully relax into, surrounded by original artwork and first edition books displayed in custom cases. The book is doing well, I said, pouring coffee into cups that cost more than Victoria's favorite Instagram prop mug. Over 800,000 copies sold worldwide. Film rights went to A24. The deal closed yesterday. The numbers hung in the air between us. 800,000 copies. A film deal with one of the industry's most respected studios. These weren't lucky break numbers. These were empire numbers. I think it's time I told you what I actually do, I continued, pulling up the presentation I'd prepared on my tablet. Thompson Literary Group. 7 imprints. 200 employees. 47 million in revenue last year. I own it all. I showed them everything. The corporate structure, the pseudonymous careers, the international expansion, the properties I owned, the life I'd built while they'd pitted my struggling bookstore existence. Each slide brought new comprehension, new shock, new understanding of how thoroughly they'd misread my life. When I finished, the silence was absolute. Finally, Victoria spoke, her voice small and genuine for perhaps the first time in years. Why didn't you tell us? Because you never asked, I said simply. You never looked past what you wanted to see. My father's hands shook slightly as he set down his coffee. All those times I offered advice, tried to help you, you were already more successful than I'd ever been. Yes, I confirmed. And I let you offer because it seemed kinder than correcting you. Derek leaned forward, his face working through emotions he didn't have words for. What happens now? Now, I said, you decide what kind of relationship you want with the real me. Not the version you invented. The actual person sitting in front of you. I offered them what I'd offered before, honesty, boundaries, and the possibility of rebuilding on foundations of truth. Some would take it. Some wouldn't. But I was done hiding to make them comfortable. The city stretched out beyond my windows, full of stories waiting to be told, of truths waiting to be seen. My mother had taught me that the best narratives were the ones that transformed people, that showed them something they'd been too blind to notice. My family was finally ready to see me. And I was finally ready to be seen. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.